gathered together from the cosmic reaches of the universe. Here, in this great hall of the Signal Watch, are the most powerful forces of good ever assembled. Join us as we discuss all manner of topics across the multiverse of comic books, history, creators, storylines, movies, and more. The Signal Watch podcast presents Kryptonian Thought Beast, a comics podcast series dedicated to truth, justice, and peace for all mankind. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is
Simon McDonald, or what you might know as SimonCanada, not to be confused with Simon UK.
Yeah, so we have known each other online for
since 2008, actually.
At least, yeah. I was pretty sure I'd known you before the Simon who's usually here, because that's how he became Simon UK on the blog, because I was like, I need to differentiate the Simons when I'm talking about them. And I did not know at the time Simon UK would become such an integral part of my life. But here we are. And it's been thrilling because before this recording, Simon and I have never actually talked to each other except for emails and like DMs and things like that. And we just spent 30 minutes talking to each other like two adult humans. It was very exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. We have this internet friendship, and I was a little worried. I thought that maybe this is the longest catfish in history, but you are a real person. That is good to see.
I mean, sort of a real person. It's still the jury's still out. But you brought up a movie I hadn't really thought about in a good long while, for a pretty good reason. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And it dovetails into where we met. And it's basically you had a blog and you're running a contest for a DVD copy of The New Frontier. And I don't know how I happened upon your blog, but I did, comment on it and started following you. And lo and behold, I did win a copy of the DVD. And that is the movie that we're going to be watching today, and how our friendship started.
Yeah, it was this golden period from like 2006 to I'd say 2010, where companies were like hitting up even like bloggers like myself who didn't have that much visibility, just so they could get some coverage out there of their movies. And I immediately alienated all of those companies, because I would be like, well, I'm going to say what I think. And they'd be like, do it. Go ahead. Tell us whatever you think. And then I'd say what I thought. And then they'd go radio silent, and I'd never hear from them again. And one by one, my connections dried up. So my if you want free stuff, you have to be a lot nicer than I am, was kind of the lesson. I think I also ruined somebody else's connection to getting DVDs from Disney, because of a incoherent, rambling takedown of a Santa Paws movie, one of the Air Bud spin-off things.
My daughter, we've watched a lot of the Paws movies, so I actually pretty much have Santa Paws memorized. I haven't seen it for a long time, but yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, I'll dig it up and send you the incoherent review. But yeah, it was kind of fun. And then I can't remember. I think the last one I ever got was when Speed Racer came out. It wasn't Speed Racer itself. They were going to try and launch a new cartoon, and I had nothing nice to say about it. And that was the last free DVD I think I ever got in the mail that I was solicited directly to the blog. But I was glad that you were able to get it, and I'm glad that we have been in contact and been pals for low these many years. I'm now working with people who are probably born in 2008, so it's been, it's been quite a ride.
Yeah, same,
Um,
same.
you read the we're both comic guys, and you read a lot of Marvel as well as DC. You're kind of the same generation where people didn't like pick one company that they were going to champion and read both. Um, but you read New Frontier when it came out. Do you remember when it was coming out and all that?
Like vaguely, I remember when it was coming out. I just actually reread it in preparation for this podcast. But I always thought it was really interesting because it is, and I would say, an unabashedly American like mythology, but it's written and drawn by a Canadian. So that always kind of confused me when it was coming out.
Yeah, the comic itself, there was a guy, he has passed in the past few years. His name was Darwin Cook, and DC at the time, and I think Paul Levitz was probably the publisher when that came out, um, was really kind of letting people do their own kind of Elseworlds takes quite a bit. And it wasn't unusual for something to come out. This one had a lot of buzz about it. It would come out that would be different from whatever the mainstream titles were. You'd have like Dracula Batman, or I remember they had a series of like tributes to silent movie things. Like they did a Metropolis, as in Fritz Lang's Metropolis for Superman and things like that. But this came out as a prestige. I want to say 4 issue series.
I think it was five.
Okay.
I don't want to correct you, but I want to say it was
Yeah, I
five
did
issue.
no
Yeah.
research before this, so I will go with whatever you read it. I didn't. So
Yeah. No,
um,
it's, I think it was five. It was weirdly collected in two separate volumes when it eventually became trades. And then since then they've done like absolute versions where everything gets packed together. Um, but yeah, Darwin Cook, Canadian, like lived in Toronto. It was like 4 hour drive away from me. I'm really surprised that I never personally met him at a comic book convention in the area. Unfortunately, he has passed away, so the opportunity to do that has passed as well. Um, but yeah, I think DC like kind of pulled him from obscurity because he had tried to like, get into comics and then went back to like being a magazine editor in Toronto before they pulled him in for this, and then he just kind of burst onto the scene with New Frontier.
and it was really big when
Yeah.
it came out. I remember like a lot of things that would come out, like Kingdom Come and other kind of prestige series. It felt like that was where the real action was happening with DC at the time. The mainline comics were kind of going through the motions, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but they were, they're having their, whatever the event of the year was, or, whatever. And Batman was having another gang war and yada, yada, yada. And Superman was a mess as always. So you kind of have these things where they're like, well, we're going to kind of try and distill kind of what is DC into these things. And I thought New Frontier, when I was reading it, did maybe as much as I love Kingdom Come is an endpoint. And it wasn't an origin story in any way, shape, or form, really. And this was kind of an origin story for Silver Age DC proper, um, in a really exciting way that really acknowledged the past. Looked like nothing that, I mean, I wouldn't say like nothing you've ever seen, because it looked very much like the stylized art of the 1950s and 60s. With a really cool color palette and a really interesting sensibility. Um, and for somebody who had not had a lot of comic work published up till that point, amazingly good pacing on the page, if I remember correctly. Um, and I remember it sold quite well. And this is back when comic blogs actually talked about comics and not like who are Wolverine's 10 best villains or something. Um, and so, yeah, there was quite a bit of chatter about the comic itself.
Yeah, well, it not to put shade on the local comic book convention that they're holding in Ottawa this weekend. It's this 3 day event, and many years I will end up going because I'll want to talk to some comic people, but there's not really any comic people there. They're all TV and movie people, and it's like, where did all the comic conventions go? And it's like, it disappoints me because I would love once again to get another sketch of the Sandman, like the Golden Age Sandman, because that's my collection. But yeah, the original series, and we'll probably talk over pieces of like how it's the comic is different than the movie that we've watched. But it also sets up the Golden Age quite a bit as well. Like it pulls from the Justice Society of America and I think like Dinosaur Island and a bunch of other concepts that helps set up the Silver Age. And Batman and Superman exist in their Golden Age, like versions, and then move into the Silver Age in the comic as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The comic itself did stuff that the movie then borrows from. And so you do definitely the only thing you see in the film of the Golden Age is the maybe 10 seconds of the original Justice Society kind of like in a montage, like breaking up and being kind of told not to do superhero stuff anymore by the government. It's an interestingly adult take on all of this stuff. It really knows its 20th century history and it does a very good job of kind of anticipating how all this stuff would have played out. And that's something I'll be totally honest, I just miss in comics at this point. I'm also a 48-year-old dude, but like an acknowledgement that there's a real world out there and that these things playing up against the real world, how they would be impacted. And of course, it's all still fantasy, but it's to me more interesting than everyone's an X-Man and the X-Men only talk to each other and it might as well be taking place on Middle Earth. Like it has no connection or tether to any kind of reality.
Well, yeah, I'm a little out of date on X-Men comics, but I think they have their own island that they're all on now, and they don't really interact with the rest of the Marvel universe. So it's kind of where they're at. I guess that might be ending. But yeah, in the comic and in the movie, they did a really good job of weaving the superhero story between like real life events with the McCarthy trials, Korean War, like all of that. All of that is kind of like there on the page as well.
Yeah, I mean, you meet Wonder Woman when she's in to what even Americans who are very aware of the Vietnam, conflict or war, like she's there 10 years before that, running around when it's still called Indochina, right? I mean, she's they're worried about the French colonists and all that. Like that's like not like hidden history or anything, but I'm like, if you even showed this movie to somebody now who was like in their 20s, they'd have no idea what you were talking about. That history is just not discussed anymore. But it at the time when it came out, it felt very relevant and an interesting take on. Yeah, of course, if Wonder Woman were dropped in, but in a Watchmen sort of way into one of these things, this is exactly how the 6'4" Amazon would have reacted. Anyway, I found it to be all the characters felt very much like themselves, but like, hey, we're actually writing this for people who are over 18.
Yeah, and I mean, it was. I think now they've released it as a black label to specifically say it's for older audiences. And when I popped the DVD in to watch it, I noticed that it was PG-13, which was kind of surprising. But I guess there's no sex, there's no cursing, so it didn't get the R. But as you mentioned earlier, it's pretty dark, and it starts off with a couple of scenes that are quite dark and are going to establish that this isn't your happy-go-lucky superhero show. I mean, Hal Jordan is a fighter pilot in the Korean War, and he's forced to kill somebody in order to protect his own life. And then the scene that you talked about with Wonder Woman, where, she's, giving people a choice, and, they make an understandable but quite dark choice. And that's probably within the first 10 minutes of the movie. And it really establishes that, things are very serious in the new frontier.
Yeah. The Oh man, did it we lost the video again? Hold on 1 second. I figured out when it's doing it. If I clicked and open a new tab to like look something up, that's when it's turning off the camera for some reason.
Yeah.
I've never seen that happen before. Anyway, yeah, it has a lot of dark stuff. I mean, not even there's been rated R Batman cartoons at this point, but I always feel like it's a little more edgelordy sort of rated R, rather than, hey, we're actually going to talk about real stuff. And we're going to try and overlay superheroes with that. So, buckle up. And I know there's a lot of different feelings people have about those things, but I do find it interesting, if nothing else. I don't think it diminishes what really happened, and I don't think it puts too much importance or an imaginary importance on those characters. It's just more of a thought experiment of, yes, but what if? Which, Watchmen made its whole bones on, right?
Yeah, and some parts of this are very Watchmen-esque, I think is what I had written in my notes. And there's like one particular scene that we may talk about later. Kind of feels like that.
Yeah. Um, Clearly the Darwin Cook this is really to me a Green Lantern story, especially in the film. You have all the characters. I mean, you have everyone, Adam Strange shows up with no lines, which delights me to no end. But it's really a Green Lantern story, and a lot of the stuff that he references is coming directly from both the book of the right stuff and then the film. And very clearly has an understanding of who the astronauts were, and kind of even their chatter, that he drops in for Hal Jordan. He that's his aspiration, right, to go be an astronaut, and he keeps saying like outstanding, which was, the cool of the astronaut era. Um, so it's fun to see them kind of try and work that out, and try and make that actually work in the movie. And I think the voice casting on it's really good. They got David Boreanaz. How do you say it?
The guy from Bones is how I say it.
Exactly. Angel from Buffy, that guy.
Yeah.
But it's really, as often was during the Andrea Romano voice directing era, it's this like amazing all-star cast of people you wouldn't necessarily have thought of to bring in. Some people who are completely, yes, that's bring them in. Lucy Lawless is Wonder Woman. Miguel Ferrer is in as John Jones. Um, Neil
Al
Patrick Harris.
McLaughlin is Superman. Yeah. Neil
Uh-huh.
Patrick Harris is Flash. And that's what I was going to bring up, because that very early scene between Superman and Wonder Woman, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, that's Kyle McLaughlin. That's Lucy Lawless. And that I thought was a really good decision by them, because it's saying that this is Elseworlds. This is not part of the Diniverse. Like, this is not the cartoons that you're used to seeing. I thought that was a really great, voice casting decision by Andrea Romero. Sorry, did I get that name wrong? Yeah, I probably did.
Romano, yeah. But yeah, I mean, she was absolutely amazing at her job, and I do think it's one of those places, like, since she's retired, that you can feel it in the a lot of the, the directing and producing has changed in the past few years. But that's definitely one of the places where you can feel the gap, is the voice directing just isn't as spot on as it was, kind of through the early 90s straight through like 2010 or whatever.
Yeah, she's amazing. And the other thing, that speaking of voice actors, it opens with a voiceover from Keith David, and you put Keith David in anything, and I'm up there for it. It's like, that's great. And it's like, oh, it's Goliath from Gargoyles. It's like, my childhood is speaking to me again, and it just gave me like a warm feeling, really.
If you're tuning into this and it's been a while since you've seen the movie or you've never seen it, the basic setup of the film is, um, the a spooky voice is kind of narrating a story of man's rise from kind of caveman to whoops, he has nuclear weapons. And a, for lack of a better term, a Cthulhu like presence is going to make itself known. Um, and it has amazing psychic powers as well as you, as we find out later, physical powers. Um, and it is going to wipe humanity off the map. And our heroes don't know this, so there's a bit of a ticking clock for the start of all of that. Um, and the heroes are also simultaneously, one by one, kind of coming into existence in the world. The Flash is already in motion, as you mentioned. Superman and Batman are kind of in their golden age existence. Um, and anyway, they're kind of dealing with their own stuff, including the fact that the government seems to want to control them, which is one thing that I think gets now kind of overdone. In like every single time a superhero shows up, suddenly you find out that there's, Task Force X is going to show up with, sci-fi weaponry and all that. I am enjoying it in adventures, my adventures with Superman, but at the same time, I'm like, oh, we're doing this again. Government's got to go after the superhero again. But here, I think it's handled very, very well. Partially because you get a more human sort of character in King Faraday.
Yeah, and I think when like this is supposed to be set in the mid 50s or thereabouts, and like it
Mm-hmm.
kind of lines up with the the House Committee on American Activities, and that's why the JSA had to go into retirement because the government needed to know who they were, and of course Batman is not gonna stand for that and continues to fight crime in Gotham. But we're introduced to all of these new heroes that are showing up, like the Flash and eventually Green Lantern. So
Um, Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about Val and kind of that whole storyline, because it's, if you read the original comics, it's like 8 pages, and Hal goes from hanging out with his buddy to Tom to being a Green Lantern. Um, and this really kind of distends it and tries to say who is Hal Jordan, and tries to, in my opinion, fight against the notion that Hal Jordan is in any way a boring character.
yeah, I mean, I think that's something that folks always kind of mention with the early Silver Age characters that they introduce, whether it be Green Lantern or Aquaman or Flash, that they're all the same character and they're pretty stale. But this gives us a whole new way of looking at Green Lantern because, like as you said, it's the right stuff. It's like this guy has always wanted to be an astronaut, so that gives you a reason for like why he's doing a lot of the things that he's doing. And I thought it was pretty interesting as well. And I'm glad you mentioned the right stuff because there's a scene later on in the movie and it's like a full on homage to the right stuff as they're like, walking to the launch pad. So
Mhm.
yeah, the symbolism visually is there as well.
Yeah, I think they do a good job of getting the idea across of that. I think Jeff Johns probably put the best kind of pin in what makes someone qualified to be a Green Lantern, which was you have the ability to overcome fear instead of like you have an indomitable will, which is like that's any psychopath on the planet. So not the best selection criteria. Um, so yeah, it, it, I mean, you could probably point to that too if you have the ability to overcome great fear, but I think they just show it more rather than tell it here, which comics love to tell to give you kind of whatever the hook is for the character over and over and over. And I think both he and Barry Allen, you really get to see who they are through their behavior with against other people throughout the course of the movie.
Yeah, they do a really good job introducing Barry as well, and it's interesting to see like he's so self-effacing in the show because he's like, oh, I'm just the guy who runs fast, and it's like you're the Flash, man. You you have amazing superpowers. You're more than just a guy who runs super fast. But he cares about Iris and other people and just trying to help people. And again, there's a scene later on in the movie where the Flash retires suddenly because the government is trying to control him as well, which is a theme that keeps coming up over and over again in the movie.
Yeah, one of the things I found refreshing, and you guys, if you listen to the podcast with other episodes, we talk about superhero movies. One of my chief complaints about the difference between superhero comics and superhero films, and I think superhero comics have learned the wrong lessons and have started to absorb this into their content, is it becomes very much about itself, and the characters are constantly cleaning up after themselves. That if you listen to the Flash podcast, it's one of my rants that I go off on of, well, the villain at the end of this movie is actually the hero. Like, this is so completely absorbed the idea of being about itself, it made the hero the villain. And here it's a lot more true to what I think of with the point of superheroes, of they're going out and altruistically trying to help other people because they have been bestowed with great power. That's kind of Superman at his core. Superman did not run around just fighting his dad's like frenemy, which is what the movies would have you believe. That's what Superman's job is. Like, he had many decades of existing before all that stuff got cooked up. And it's definitely in the comics not, they bring it into the comics more now, but it's still not the point. But this particular story I think is really fascinating because the center, which is the big scary floating island monster thing, is just a thing. It's a floating plot point for them all to go address together, to get them to band together. It's not anyone's in particular bugaboo. You don't find out it's like Aquaman's like spilled something at some point 10 years earlier and accidentally created the center, and he's actually responsible. The center just is. And they cumulatively getting over all of their differences is the point of what does it take to pull everybody together.
Yeah, if they were rewriting this today, they would probably have Hal Jordan crash landing his spaceship into a planet, and that alien comes to Earth for revenge, and that would be the center, because they would have to like show that it's the action of the hero that is actually causing the problem. But you don't need that to tell a good story. And what we have is like these idealized versions of people that just want to help, and that's really what they're trying to say, instead of making everything about, oh, it's your secret twin brother who's the bad guy, and he's mad at you because you never acknowledged him. And it's like, but you didn't know about him until 3 seconds ago. So yeah, some pretty bad storytelling these days, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I just appreciate the idea a lot more. I mean, when we look at what we call quote unquote heroes in our own world, most of the time, firefighter is not going to go fight fires because the fire killed my dad, or that was a job they decided they were going to do and put themselves on the line to go do it. And I don't know why we have such a disconnect with that. And I kind of blame Superman too in some ways. I kind of blame the decision to make the Joker tied together with Batman's parents in Batman 89. And people have felt it's very clever. I'm like, doesn't need to be clever. It'd be really straightforward, and people just going out and trying to do the right thing. I think maybe the closest I've seen to it is that the villain accidentally creates the hero into the Spider-Verse, which is kind of the opposite of the idea. They're still tied together in some way, but kind of sort of loosely, barely. It's not a direct thing in quite the same way.
Yeah, people, they don't always need like some crazy motivation to do the right thing. I know this is called like kind of Pollyannish maybe coming from me, but most people are good, inherently good, and they try to do the right thing whenever possible. And when we have films or TV or books or whatever that show that the only reason they're doing this is because they're trying to get revenge upon the, the spider that bit them or the guy who shot their parents, or, it's like, no, sometimes people are just good, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, and I think honestly, I'd be curious to see if, as Gunn takes on the DCU, if he doesn't understand and incorporate some of that. He's good enough about creating characters that have depth on other levels. No one in the Suicide Squad's going off to fight Starro because, Starro stole their lunch money when they were a kid or anything like that. Or nor is Starro attacking because someone stole Starro's lunch money when they were a kid. Starro just is. Starro's a problem. You go off and deal with Starro. Um, so yeah, it's I do like that is kind of what pulls them together. I also, to be totally honest, love the fact that this movie is just full of deep cuts and does not shy away from like, hey, there's the challengers of the unknown. Here's the
Yeah.
Blackhawks. Like these characters who DC keeps kind of trying to forget about, um, which I still think seem like they could be cool. And if someone, had a mind to do something with them. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like in every panel or every panel, you can tell where my brain is. Every shot of the last 10-15 minutes of the movie, it's something cool that you can't believe they decided that they were going to put all. But Darwin Cook had originally done that. He was kind of um, doing a George Perez of like, let me see how many people I can cram into this thing to make it feel huge and epic as all these people come together.
Yeah, I did get a charge every time I saw the purple jumpsuits of the challengers of the unknown in the background somewhere. But yeah, there's a lot of Easter eggs in there. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, and this is maybe because I took way too many English courses in university, but the kidnap scene where Batman and his full-on Golden Age outfit is, fighting these disciples of the Center because they've kidnapped a child, and Martian Manhunter and his partner come in. After the fight, one of the Center guys who's knocked out says, without the Center, there is no holding. And I have to assume that is an allusion to a poem called The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats. I don't know if you've ever read that one.
Oh, it's been 25
Yeah.
years, but yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why. I think a lot, that one always struck with me and I was like, oh, I mean, obviously it's an homage to things. And it's not just, superheroes, the challengers on their own, they're throwing in like English literature in here for us as well. So it's a little deeper of a comic of a movie than you're usually seeing. So I really appreciated that.
Well, I mean, I don't want to like, I'm going to because I keep doing it on this podcast. It doesn't matter. Um, when people talk about like, oh, you're not getting the depth of like Batman versus Superman because they're both moody and sad. And I'm mad that, my mom won't buy me a new PS5. And so I'm mad, moody and sad. So there's depth here. Like, this is actually what it means to write for adults.
Yeah.
Like, which is bizarre to say about this like 80-minute cartoon versus this 2.5 hour epic that cost, $200 million or whatever to make. But writing about things and making literary allusions that are not like, well, everyone read Romeo and Juliet in ninth grade, so we're going to make an allusion to Romeo and Juliet here. Like, I recognize when they said that line during that fight scene or at the end of the fight scene, I was like, oh yeah, that's a literary allusion. I should look it up before we record, and I did not.
Uh,
But I do think it's, the same thing of like understanding the political situation of, what was going on in the US with McCarthyism. The way people keep trying to say wasn't that big of a deal
it was
in
a
this
pretty big
country.
deal, and I live in Canada, so
Yeah, it was a very big deal and it was very wrong. And but it's always like someone's looking to try and do the same thing. So they want to be like, oh, you guys made a big deal out of that. It's like, yeah, there was a reason. Um, So yeah, it's a smart thing. It was also clearly Darwin Cook's big shot, right? I mean, he was going to leave nothing unturned that he wanted to get into a comic when he was given this opportunity. I don't always think that works when people get that shot, but man, he made it work here.
Yeah, you feel like he put everything into this, and if I think I looked it up, and he was involved quite a bit in the movie as well, like doing storyboarding and polishing up some dialogue. So it wasn't just that he put all of himself into the comic; he put all of himself into this cartoon as well. So
I will say the one thing I think that they do a better job of fleshing out because they have more time, fleshing out the individual character arcs within the comic. It's a little rushed because it's such a big story and they got to do it in 80 minutes in the film. But the thing that I think works better in the movie than did in the comic was when they do get to all the center stuff, you have absolutely no confusion about what's been occurring. Versus in the comic, I felt like it was almost too infrequently kind of dropped in around that stuff. Or when I was like, oh, that's actually what the big bad is going to be, and kind of the culminating event. I didn't have a problem with it, but here it's like starts with this is the problem. We're going to make it really clear to the audience, like this is what we're dealing with, and that's fine. There's because there's no reason to not do that, and I think maybe had Cook had a little bit more experience, he might have made the same decision with the actual comic at the time. But how did it feel to you going back and looking at the comic? Am I way off on this?
no, you're not at all. And I mean, the comic is like more stretched out. Like it starts out on Dinosaur Island with the losers trying to rescue another U.S. serviceman, and so there's a whole piece there, and that establishes later that the center, the floating island that attacks. Spoilers, everyone. Comes from that part of the comic, but there's no straight line drawn from Dinosaur Island to the eventual end. A lot of these different things, like you say, are dropped in there. But with like a tight, like 80, 85 minute running time, like they really, make sure that there's a through line going from the very beginning of the movie to the end so that everything connects well. And again, I think that was the movie like almost a decade after, after the comic book had come out. So he had more time to think about it as well. Like any great artist, I'm sure he suffered over things and thought like, oh, I could have done that better if I had a bit more time.
Oh yeah, yeah. It is absolutely an opportunity. And I can't remember who wrote the movie itself and directed it, but I do have IMDb open. I guess I can take a look. But Dave Bullock, who was an artist who was not entirely different from him, was I think the director. Um, but yeah, it had Stan Berkowitz and yeah, it was with the other writer who's a little bit more of an old hand at Warner Brothers Animation. Um, and whatever happened, it does feel like they kind of got their stuff figured out in a better way. And it makes the story work. They do try and work in like the losers stuff in like two different things. They show a picture of the losers at one point, and then another point you can hear on the radio someone saying, "Yeah, we went to go look for this dinosaur island someone claimed existed, and it's not there." And there's no like direct connection to because the center moved.
Yeah.
The
It's
center
like,
took
oh,
off, so it's not going to be at those coordinates anymore.
yeah, the losers found it. And then, the island decided to move before the rest of the US military showed up there.
Yeah.
One of the things, uh, it's kind of funny when you have like one of those epic scenes in a comic book and you're like, oh, that's definitely going to translate over quite well to animation or a movie. And there was one point very early in the comic book where I think it's Navajo from the Losers is fighting a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and they actually translate that scene to King Faraday later on in the movie version. So the scene. They're like, no, that scene's really cool. So we're definitely going to fit that into the cartoon, even though that we're not showing the losers.
Yeah. It would have been too much because you would have been setting up a bunch of characters you're never going to see again.
Yeah.
And I get over the expanse of the graphic novel why they could do it, or the comics why they could do it. And the island. What was it called? The island that time forgot. Was that the original run of the comic? I'm trying to remember what the war that time forgot. I think that
Uh,
was
I
the
think it was, yeah.
original run of the DC stuff. I was sitting around waiting to see if Rex the Wonder Dog was ever going to show up, but I don't think
Uh,
Rex makes an appearance.
no, you know what? I don't remember him from the movie at all, but he,
Yeah,
was in the comics. So
yeah. Too much to explain. What happened to the doggy?
yeah.
Um,
And I mean, let's, I mean, I hate to say this, folks, but the dog doesn't make it in the comic. And I don't think anybody wants to see that in a movie. And I'm glad they left it out.
that's probably yes. We're like, well, if the dog isn't going to make it, we can't possibly do these scenes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. If you're unfamiliar during kind of the era of like Rin Tin Tin and Lassie and all that, um, there was a variety of their attempts to kind of bring in super dogs or wonder dogs or whatever into the comics. And Rex the Wonder Dog was like, I don't know if he had his own title, but he would definitely be on the cover sometimes of various war comics and whatever. But yeah, he was a DC staple. It's a different era, man.
Yeah, totally. I mean, eventually they got it right with crypto, right? So did he not have a comic for a while or?
But he didn't have a mini series until it was like a spin-off of the cartoon in like 2008. He'd
Oh,
never had
wow.
his own title. He's had children's books and stuff like that over the years, but really that was the first standalone crypto thing, I think.
Oh, my comic historian is failing me. I just kind of assumed that, where everybody in the Superman family had a comic book at one point in time in the Silver Age, I thought that crypto would also have one.
He probably had backup stories in like Adventure or something like that. But yeah, I don't believe he because that is one particular area where I have done research.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think Crypto had his own series until like that 2008 six-issue series.
Well, as long as that was it Comet the Super Horse, as long as that weirdo doesn't get a book, that's fine.
If you want to lose some sleep, um, look up the Wikipedia entry for Comet the Super Horse and just wonder if you could have the drugs those people were taking when they came up with Comet and his whole story, because it's
That's
bizarre.
bizarre. Yeah, that's a great word for it. It's certainly bizarre. That is one of the weirdest origin stories I've ever heard of in my entire life. Yeah, that's amazing. And
Now Comet's just a if Comet shows up, Comet is just a horse.
thank
Like
goodness
he's a horse. It's maybe a
he's a
super
super
horse,
horse. Yeah, that's
but
fine.
he doesn't have all the issues he had in that. But yeah, I do also kind of love the closing montage of, and this is the bold new world where the new frontier we are opening and getting like, Black Canary and the Teen Titans, and you get a shot of Kara for, a hot second, of and it makes me profoundly sad because I would have happily read, four or five comics that existed in that world. If they let Darwin Cook just kind of keep his hands on that continuity, or that reality. It's kind of like when they tried to do the Kingdom following Kingdom Come, because that had been such a hit, and they were like, oh, we're going to do the Kingdom now, and they let like everybody play in that playground, and it just didn't work. But I think they could have maybe pulled it off at least for a couple of years, had they if they'd really let Darwin kind of keep one hand on all those people, and kind of stick with a more interesting artistic style than what was the house style in kind of back then.
Yeah, it would have been great for him just to have a series. It could have been called the New Frontier, like the continuing series, and then just jump around in the different DC universe, let him tell stories like with the Teen Titans. That particularly for me, that would have been amazing to see that. And this is also the Teen Titans that existed before Wolfman and Perez got a hold of them as well. So
Right.
yeah, just in case people are wondering, it's more of the Silver Age Teen Titans.
Was
Um,
Connor the guy who launched the original Titans? I can't remember.
that sounds right. I would have to look that up, but yeah, my encyclopedic knowledge of comic books is waning. I don't know. I think other things are starting to replace it. Like
Oh
I don't know.
no, not
Yeah, I
real
know.
things.
It's I know. No, they're not real things. They're just more useless things. My ability to store useless trivia is still quite high. It's just it continuously gets overwritten. Um, but yeah, one thing about as they're moving into the Silver Age, there, I thought the very neat thing that they did was, and I talked about Batman and the kidnapping scene, and he's in his Golden Age outfit, the big ears and everything like that, and then he scares the kid, and the kid is terrified of Batman because he looks scary. And then later on in the movie, they introduce Robin, and they also have Batman has a new outfit, which is slightly less scary, and they make an allusion to it's like hey, this is what's with the updated look, and he's like tired of scaring the wrong people. So I thought that was a good way of moving him from the Golden Age to the Silver Age as well.
Yeah, I mean, Robin clearly in the real world popped up early on in the golden age of Batman, but I did like that they made it more of like he's lightening up and he's taking on this ward, and it felt like the right move. Um, they don't do much with Jimmy, but you see Jimmy and Lois quite a bit in this movie, and I really really like the take for the most part of. With one small caveat, Kira Sedgwick voices Lois Lane, and I really like that she's the combat photographer, combat reporter with her photographer, kind of like, she's wearing pants. My God,
Yeah.
and sensible shoes. And I think it's a really cool take, and it's the one that reminds you of why Superman would find her so fascinating and someone he'd want to be around. Um, the one thing I didn't like in the translation from the film to the movie, and I don't know why they didn't do it, was in the comic, Lois has a much more emotional reaction to Superman reappearing and what is said to her by Aquaman. I almost said Arthur Man, which I'd like to see that hero, Arthur Man.
I think that probably in the PBS series Arthur, that might have been a one-off episode where Arthur gets superpowers. I mean that thing ran for what 12 years or something like that. So
Yeah. Well, they need to do a Dudley Moore, someone who's like becomes Arthur, like I become Arthur Man. If I drink enough champagne and become obnoxious enough.
Arthur 3, Arthur Man.
Um, but they in the movie, he just sees him and then goes to him. I'm like, you're in animation. You could have done so much with the expression there with Darwin Cook's lines, and they just didn't. And I'm just like, that's such like a tear jerking moment in the book itself, in the way it's presented in kind of these cinematic panels. It's kind of even laid out for them, and it's not what they do. And I can't. It's the one misstep for me in the entire film. I was like, what? Why? Why didn't you just do exactly what was on the page?
Yeah, and I feel like maybe they were trying to bring the running time in, like, because it's only, what is it, 80, 85 minutes tops for this movie. So, and it was at the very end of the film, and they're like, hey, let's just wrap this thing up as quickly as possible. But yeah, they left meat on the bone there. And in case people are wondering what we're talking about, if you haven't seen the movie, and you really should, but earlier on in the fight with the center, like the climatic battle, Superman goes down. And I mean, Superman never goes down. But
Yeah.
this is a really good plot device because it gives, the other opportunities like Green Lantern to come into his own, Flash to, have a meaningful role in the final battle as well. And everybody's, contributing something, whether it be Ray Palmer or the Martian Manhunter. I think that was a really great idea because most of the time, like Superman can clap his hands together and solve any problem. And this gave us like a real reason for why he wasn't around in the climatic battle.
Yeah, he did. He falls basically into the ocean, and it's the real all is lost moment. And everyone's got a cowboy up at this point, and we got to pull together. We're not going to be fighting each other. We've got to we will jointly do this. And it gives everybody, like you're saying, their moment to shine. But after all's said and done, that nonetheless, at this point, they believe Superman's dead. And so you have this moment of this Atlantean sea vehicle thing crawling up onto the beach. And then it opens and Aquaman comes out basically carrying Superman. And it says this man has been looking for a woman named Lois. He's been asking. And in the comic, because it's Lois and she thought he was dead, you can imagine, the emotional reaction. And in the movie, she just goes like runs like out of frame, and that's it. And I just was like, man, like every other emotional beat in this thing has been rang so true, and that one just felt like bobbling at the 1 yard line. So
Yeah, I would love to like learn more about the making of the movie and whether or not there was some sort of constraint on the running time where they didn't think that, folks would spend more than, 80 minutes on this or not. But yeah, there's definitely more they could have done with that scene. And at the end, one of the things I really did like about the end, I think, comic book nerds like yourself and myself, we recognize that this is an Atlantean trawler about to come out of the water. But if you're not well versed in comics, you're like, oh, here we go again. There's one more, thing that's going to happen. And instead of it being a threat, it's actually something good that's happening, is that, Superman lived. So it kind of hits you in two different ways there.
yeah, it's a great sequence. I'm not saying it doesn't work in the movie. It's just not as rich as in the book. And yeah, and I'm sure there's stuff in there for the Barry. I'm a Barry Allen fan too, but I was like, they felt like they caught all the Iris stuff, and Iris being smarter than you would suspect. And of course, I knew you were the Flash all along. You dumb dumb, or I've known it for a while, which is what happened in the comics, by the way. The original Silver Age of her going, yeah, I you keep running away. I think I
Yeah.
figured it out.
Yeah, it's like you disappear and the Flash shows up. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, after the 200th time that happened, I put it together, which is great because so many times like the love interest was completely clueless for 400 issues of a comic, and it's like that's probably not going to happen in real life. They'll put it together a lot quicker than that. I mean, well, that's the joke in the latest Spider-Man movies as well. Like MJ does not take very long to figure out that Peter is Spider-Man at all. So
yeah, yeah. And I think I don't know if you've seen the new My Adventures with Superman thing on HBO, but I mean, they spent 2 episodes out of the 10 with them not knowing,
that's
with
great.
Lois, with Jimmy and Lois not knowing. It's like we can do richer stories if they know. So we're gonna. This is not going to be a show about Superman like pulling the wool over their eyes, pretending not to be Superman. They did it long enough to where it had occurred, and then never mind. Like we're moving on with the romance angle, and we're not going to have him lying about who he is as part of the romance angle. So I accept it. Um,
Yeah, I mean, lying in a romantic situation is not a really good foundation for one. Anyway, I think we've learned as a society that's probably not the best thing that we should portray in our art, whether it be a comic book or a cartoon.
Decades
But
of gaslighting, poor
I
Lois.
it's like, why are men? Why do we do these things? I have not actually seen the cartoon yet. I'm very interested in it, but because it's on HBO, it's kind of like a year delayed before it'll show up here on my Canadian streaming services. I don't know. I think
Oh,
they have to
really?
like
Okay.
climb the ice wall or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get
Yeah, we
into.
we only send the White Walkers stuff when we're well done with it. So yeah,
Yeah,
we'll send it
yeah.
to you guys eventually.
At some point in time, you'll send somebody up with a Betamax tape, and we'll just start showing it. And it's like our backwoods technology we have up here.
Um, I have a million questions about that, but we'll not put them on the podcast. But yeah, I was excited when you brought the movie up because one, it gave me an excuse to rewatch it, and it was an absolute delight. And it blew past yesterday when I watched it. I was like sat down, blinked, and the movie was over. Like it's narratively very tight. Every minute of it's a really good stuff. And I would, if my biggest complaint is I'd like to spend more time with these characters, that's the ideal ending for me. That is not a complaint. And so I would I don't know how you get people to see this thing, and so it gives me an opportunity to kind of get out there and promote a 15-year-old movie at this point. But also, if you have Max and you're in the U.S. And probably in Canada, you can see it now. So it's a if you're looking for something to watch, that I will say there's like weird for DC. There is like blood in it. So you got to be a little bit prepared for that if you're trying to show it to your kids. But I think for the otherwise, if they're 10 or 11, I don't know. You have a child, I don't. What do you think the cutoff point is though?
Oh, I'm a terrible person when it comes to the cutoff point because I've been accused by friends of subjecting my child to things at a much too early age. So yeah, I would say somewhere between 8 to 10 would be okay. But I know some friends would say you might want to wait until at least 12. But I don't know. Kids are soft these days. They got to harden up. So yeah, go ahead and show it to them.
Any other thoughts on the film? Anything that we haven't covered? I mean, we haven't talked much about the freaking all-star cast, or I mean, every one of these characters has a story arc, but I also don't want to bore the audience with. And then Martian Manhunter does this, and then Martian Manhunter does that.
Oh yeah, we
Um,
could go through the entire movie with like a beat by beat thing, and all of the different characters get a time to shine. The voice cast, as we talked about earlier, is just amazing. I think if you've watched the original Independence Day, you'll probably recognize some of that up on the screen as well, because there was definitely some homage to that. But the point that we didn't talk about is it really ends with Robert Kennedy's New Frontier speech. Like that's kind of the voiceover as
yeah.
they're doing that montage of all the different DC characters, whether it be the Teen Titans or eventually the formation of the Justice League and things like that.
Yeah, it doesn't, and people get mad if you say the 50s were not an optimistic time. The 50s were a very strange time. I mean, there's absolutely no question. It is between kind of, even for comics, if you want to look, a really good example of how things kind of were getting wacky, look up the foundation of the Comics Code Authority sometime, and the government interference that led to all of that. And that was kind of how America was at that point. And we tend to think of it as like reruns of favorite sitcoms, but as in every era, that was one thing that was going on, but there was a lot of other stuff. And at least the 60s clearly were not a great time either. Lots of stuff happened then, but the attempt at optimism, I think, is the thing that Cook really captures at the end of it. Of this is we're going to dare to do great things, and it's also something that's kind of like with the passing of this comic and the passing of Cook and kind of the older generation of folks, I really feel is kind of missing from a lot of comics in general at this point. Of they're just kind of about themselves doing their running in circular logic, building on their own mythologies, but there's not a DC keeps having these big events like death metal and whatever else, whatever the thing they just got through where they killed off the Justice League. um but at the other side of it, there's no beat to say now we're gonna try and um, do anything with any of that, or there was no point to the story kind of at the end of any of those things. And I think it's something that editorial could, take a look at some of the stuff and the big stuff of the 90s and the aughts, and kind of see what made those things sing, because they're not doing anything like that right now.
Yeah, I confess I've fallen off with a lot of my comic book reading because it just is a reset all the time. It's like, world shattering events and then back to zero, world shattering event, back to zero, and just an excuse for, you to have to buy 20 to 40 different comic books to get a coherent story. And I'm not really into that right now. I'll just continue reading Usagi Yojimbo and just having an absolute great time with it. So that's, and that's something that, the story has progressed over, decades, but things have moved along. There's a weighty continuity there, but, it isn't, going back and revisiting the same things over and over again.
Yeah. Um, if you've not seen New Frontier, like we said, it's on Max. The comics are available online, and but I would highly recommend hitting a comic shop or bookstore to see if you can find a copy. It's been in several different editions. I couldn't even tell you what edition is out now, if it's all one volume or not.
I think they recently released a one volume black label. So, DC has that new black label. And because this is more of an adult serious thing, that they put it under black label recently.
So ask the proprietor of your local comic shop if you can get your hands on it. But yeah, man, this was a delight. I'm so glad you wanted to do this, and to get to actually talk to you in person for a while, in virtual person. But we finally having we kept waiting. I kept waiting for Simon to come to Austin for South by.
I try every year to convince somebody to send me to South by, and I always try to get down to a conference. If there's a conference I can speak at, I am submitting to it. And someday I will make it to Austin. We will be able to hang out in person, and it will be a great
At this point,
event.
I fully believe I'll be in Ottawa before you're in Austin. But
they'll send me everywhere else but Austin. And folks who don't know, I worked for a company, and my manager was in Austin for 2 years. And do you think I ever met that manager in person? No. There's like, should I come down to meet you? I was saying, and they're like, no, it's okay. We can do everything over the phone. I'm like, all right. I was like, damn, I could have hang out with Ryan. All right.
well, there's a free cot and meals for you if you show up, man. I can promise you that. So.
Same. I remember back in your blog from forever ago that you and Jamie were tasting A&W root beer barbecue sauce, and I'm like, that is I want to have that experience. I know they no longer make it, but that is kind of the quintessential thing that I think about, is like, you Americans have like all of the different sauces. You have so much choice down there, and it's like I'm sure that sauce was terrible, but I want to taste it so badly. So
yeah, we were definitely going through the period. What I will take a photo of the barbecue sauce aisle. I wish we'd had this conversation 4 hours ago before I went to the grocery. I would have happily taken a photo of the barbecue sauce aisle at HEB, it's an impressive sight. We like to give ourselves options. So in our gigantic grocery store. But yeah, we'll get you down here, and I would love to hang out. And if I come to Ottawa, we have to find all the locations from. You can't do that on television. So
yeah, I mean, I'll just call up Alanis and we'll just grab her and we'll hang out. Yeah, I mean, okay. Not all Canadians know everybody, but it's fine.
all right, man. Well, thank you so much, and y'all again go look for the movie and graphic novel, and we'll be back again soon.
Great. Thanks for having me, Ryan. I had a great time.
Bye bye.
Bye.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.